I'm in the fortunate position where, as captain, the European Tour afford me the luxury of playing with who I want to play with in the regular tournaments.
Darren Clarke was easy to understand. At least, that was the version television sold. The broad smile, the cigarette between his fingers, the cigar after a round, the body that looked more comfortable in a clubhouse than inside the machinery of modern professional golf. He was the man who appeared to enjoy the game without allowing the game to control him. A gifted player, a loyal teammate, a lovable rogue from Northern Ireland who could walk into a room, laugh louder than everyone else, and make professional golf feel slightly less manufactured. Then, in July 2011, that image became complete. At Royal St. George's, Clarke finally won the Open Championship. He was 42 years old. He had spent more than 2 decades chasing the trophy. He had endured near misses, falling rankings, professional uncertainty, and a loss no golf tournament could repair. When he lifted the claret jug, the public saw a perfect ending. A survivor had won. A good man had been rewarded. The sport embraced him, but the people who knew Darren Clarke longest understood that the image was incomplete. The cigarettes were real. The celebrations were real. The charm was real, but so was something else. A stubbornness that had damaged opportunities. A refusal to live according to the system. A career repeatedly interrupted by decisions that made little sense from the outside. And a private grief that the public could acknowledge, but never fully see. There had been warnings from the beginning. Talent was never the problem. Control was. The question was not whether Darren Clarke could play golf. The question was what happened whenever golf demanded that he become someone else. Years later, when Clarke won the Senior Open Championship in 2022, the old story returned. Once again, he had survived long enough to win when few expected him to. Once again, the victory was treated as another emotional chapter in a remarkable life, but placed beside everything that came before it, the result looked different. It did not look like an isolated comeback. It looked like a pattern. A man would drift away. The sport would assume he was finished. Then, at the moment the attention disappeared, he would return. Not transformed, not reinvented. Still Darren Clarke. To understand why, the file has to be opened at the beginning. Clarke grew up in Dungannon, County Tyrone, where his father worked as the head greenkeeper at the local golf club. The course was not somewhere Darren visited. It was part of the landscape of his childhood. He carried his father's clubs. He followed him across the fairways. He watched the game before deciding to play it. Clarke did not begin seriously until he was around 11 years old. That was relatively late for someone who would eventually reach the highest level of professional golf. But once he began, moderation disappeared. He played rugby on Saturday mornings. Then, after the match ended, he went directly to the golf course. Even in winter, even when there was only enough daylight for a few holes. This is the first contradiction in the Darren Clarke story. The public image would later suggest a man who resisted discipline. But his childhood was built on repetition. He practiced in bad weather. He played until darkness stopped him. He did not lack commitment. He simply wanted commitment on his own terms. That distinction would follow him everywhere. His ability eventually took him to Wake Forest University in North Carolina on a golf scholarship. It should have been the beginning of a clean, structured rise. American college golf offered coaching, competition, facilities, and a clear route toward the professional game. But it also offered rules. No smoking, no drinking, no late nights. The system required talent to behave predictably. Clarke did not. When he was left out of the team, he packed his belongings and left. Immediately, his parents were furious. From one perspective, it was reckless. A young golfer had been handed an opportunity and walked away because he did not like the conditions attached to it. From another perspective, it revealed the central feature of his personality. Darren Clarke could accept failure. He could accept pain. He could even accept being overlooked. What he struggled to accept was being controlled. He eventually returned, completed his education, and went home to Ireland. In 1990, he won 4 amateur titles, and he turned professional. The talent had survived the conflict, but the warning remained. Clarke could rise quickly. He could also make the road more difficult than it needed to be. For much of the 1990s, he became one of Europe's best players without becoming one of golf's defining stars. He won tournaments. He contended in major championships. He finished second at the 1997 Open Championship at Royal Troon. He came close enough to create expectations, but not close enough to satisfy them. The game was entering a new era. Golfers were becoming leaner, more technical, more carefully managed. Their diets were controlled, their schedules were optimized, their public images were polished. Clarke looked like a man from another sport. Then, in 2000, he was placed directly in front of the player who represented golf's future. Tiger Woods was not merely winning tournaments. He was changing the economic and psychological structure of the game. Players arrived at events knowing that their best golf might still be insufficient. Many of them appeared defeated before the first tee. Clarke did not. At the WGC Match Play Championship in California, he moved through the field and reached the final against Woods. The evidence before the match did not favor him. Clarke had recently missed a cut. He'd even lost badly to his own manager during a practice round. Tiger was younger, fitter, more dominant, more feared. They also shared the same coach, Butch Harmon. On the practice range, Woods worked with the intensity expected from the best player in the world. Clarke walked past and joked that he did not need help. During the break between rounds, Tiger returned to practice. Clarke sat down, lit a cigar, and called his wife. It looked unserious. That was the disguise. When play resumed, Clarke did not behave like an underdog. He attacked. He repeatedly hit the ball close. He applied pressure before Woods could create any of his own. Clarke won the 36-hole final 4-3. There was no controversy in the result. No unusual ruling. No lucky bounce that changed the match. What is confirmed is simple. On that day, Darren Clarke outplayed Tiger Woods. The victory should have permanently changed Clarke's career. For a period, it appeared to. He entered the world's top 10. He remained there for 43 consecutive weeks. In 2003, he won another World Golf Championship event at Firestone, becoming one of the few players capable of winning at that level more than once. He had beaten the sport's most intimidating figure. He had contended in majors. He had proven that his unconventional appearance did not reflect an unconventional ability. But the major championship never arrived. The claret jug stayed close enough to see, and far enough to remain an accusation. Why had a player this talented not won one? Was it preparation, lifestyle, pressure? Or was golf trying to force a simple explanation onto a complicated career? There is no public evidence proving that Clarke's habits cost him a major championship. There was no calculation showing how many strokes were lost to cigarettes, late nights, or resistance to structure. What exists is a timeline. And in 2001, that timeline changed for reasons that had nothing to do with technique. Clarke's wife, Heather, was diagnosed with breast cancer. There was no attempt to turn the illness into a public campaign. No carefully staged announcement. Clarke simply began playing less. Behind the absences was a life divided in two. On the course, he was still expected to compete against the best players in the world. At home, he was a husband watching his wife fight an illness that continued to advance. Golf saw the missed tournaments. Golf saw the declining rhythm. Golf saw a player losing momentum. It did not see every hospital visit. It did not hear every private conversation. It did not experience the silence inside the family home. In 2006, Clarke was playing well at a tournament in Houston when new medical information arrived. He withdrew. He returned to London. The leaderboard no longer mattered. That summer, he played the Open Championship and missed the cut. Soon afterward, Heather Clarke died. She was 39. Darren was 38. Their sons were still children. There are events that damage a career, and there are events that make the idea of a career feel irrelevant. This was the second kind. Clarke moved back to Northern Ireland with his boys. His ranking fell. The professional game continued without him. New players appeared. New stories replaced the old ones. From the outside, it looked like decline. But rankings cannot measure the work required to prevent a family from collapsing. They do not record the mornings when a father gets out of bed because two children need him to. They do not distinguish between a player losing ambition and a man trying to survive. Then came the Ryder Cup. Before her death, Heather had asked Darren to play. He had not qualified automatically. His recent form did not justify certainty. Europe's captain would have to select him. And even if chosen, Clarke still had to decide whether he was emotionally capable of standing before thousands of people while his grief remained fresh. No one would have condemned him for staying home, but he accepted the invitation. At the K Club in Ireland, the crowd understood what his presence meant. When Clarke reached the opening tee, the reaction was not simply applause for a golfer. It was recognition. The audience was not asking him to forget. It was telling him that he did not have to carry the loss alone. Clarke drove down the fairway. He hit his approach close. He made the putt. Then he continued. He won all 3 matches he played that week. 3 matches. 3 victories. In Sunday singles, he defeated Zach Johnson and completed one of the most emotionally charged performances in Ryder Cup history. It would be easy to turn the week into mythology, to say that destiny intervened, to say that grief made him unbeatable. But grief does not usually improve a golf swing. Pain does not guarantee fairways. Loss does not control a putter. Clarke still had to execute every shot. What happened at the K Club was not proof of something supernatural. It was evidence of something that had been present since childhood. When the circumstances became unbearable, Darren Clarke did not always break. Sometimes he became clearer. The Ryder Cup made him more beloved than ever. It also protected his image. After 2006, the public no longer saw only the smoker, the drinker, or the player who had failed to convert elite talent into a major title. They saw a widower, a father, a man who had kept a promise. That did not mean the professional problems disappeared. In 2007, his results deteriorated. He missed cuts. He slipped further down the rankings. The sport waited for a recovery because it wanted the story to continue, but recovery was slow. It did not arrive with one speech or one dramatic decision. It came in fragments. A victory in China in 2008, another win at the KLM Open, his sons watching, a family beginning to rebuild. Clarke later met Alison Campbell. Stability returned gradually. So did his golf. There was no evidence that the old Darren Clarke had been replaced. He had not become a fitness symbol. He had not adopted the image of a late career technician searching for salvation through data. He remained visibly himself. That made what happened in 2011 more powerful and more confusing. Royal Street George's was Clarke's 20th attempt to win the Open Championship. 20 appearances, 20 years of expectation. The tournament had already shown him almost every form of disappointment. Near misses, missed cuts, good rounds followed by bad ones. Enough evidence to believe he could win. Enough failure to believe he never would. He entered the week without the attention surrounding the younger stars. That may have helped. The game had stopped demanding an explanation from him. He was no longer the elite player being asked why he had not won a major. He was the veteran people were pleased to see. Then he began moving up the leaderboard. On the final day, Clarke played beside Dustin Johnson. Johnson possessed the modern advantages, length, athleticism, youth, a future filled with major championship opportunities. Clarke played with a cigarette in his hand and 20 years behind him. When Johnson made a serious mistake late in the round, the championship moved toward Clarke. He did not celebrate. He lit another cigarette. He kept walking. That image became part of the legend, but it also concealed the pressure. Clarke had lived with this tournament since childhood. He had watched it escape before. He knew how quickly a lead could disappear. Only near the end did he allow himself to understand that the chase was over. He walked toward the 18th green with enough of a lead to know that the claret jug would finally be his. When the final putt dropped, the public did not need an explanation. They already knew the outline. The young golfer from Dungannon, the victory over Tiger, the years near the top, Heather's illness, the Ryder Cup, the collapse, the return. Every part of the story appeared to point toward that moment. Clarke looked upward. Viewers believed they knew who he was thinking about. Perhaps they were right. The celebration continued through the night. Friends and family gathered. Clarke arrived at the next morning's press conference visibly exhausted and still carrying the effects of the party. It became another beloved image. The Open champion behaving exactly as everyone expected Darren Clarke to behave. Unpolished, unapologetic, woman. But one detail complicated the caricature. Clarke never drank from the claret jug. He drank beside it. He celebrated around it. but he refused to use the trophy as a container. He respected it too much. That detail matters, because the public version of Clarke often suggested carelessness. The reality was more precise. He could disrespect convention while respecting the game. He could reject the system while protecting the symbol at its center. Those were not contradictions to him, only to the people trying to reduce him to an image. The years after the Open victory did not produce a perfect final act. In 2016, Clarke captained Europe at the Ryder Cup. Europe lost heavily at Hazeltine. He did not hide behind excuses. He accepted that some of his decisions had been wrong. The lovable rogue had become the responsible man standing in front of failure. Again, the story refused to remain simple. Then, in 2022, Clarke won the Senior Open Championship. He defeated Padraig Harrington by one shot, making birdie on the final hole. It placed him among a small group of players to win both the Open and the Senior Open. The sport celebrated another late victory, but this time, the old question returned with greater weight. What really happened to Darren Clarke? Was he a wasted talent who eventually found redemption? Was he an undisciplined player protected by charm and tragedy? Was he a major champion who simply developed later than expected? None of those explanations is sufficient. There is no verdict here, only the timeline. A scholarship lost because he resisted control. A career built anyway. Tiger Woods confronted and defeated. A major championship repeatedly missed. A wife lost. A promise kept. A ranking destroyed. A family rebuilt. An Open won after 20 attempts. A Ryder Cup lost under his leadership. A Senior Open captured when the sport was prepared to look elsewhere again. The pattern is not that Darren Clarke always overcame adversity. Sometimes adversity defeated him. Sometimes his own decisions made the damage worse. Sometimes the charm allowed difficult questions to disappear. But the story did not disappear. It waited. The people who knew Clarke longest understood what television could not show. The smoke was not the man. The jokes were not the man. Even the trophies were not the man. They were pieces of an identity that never fit comfortably inside professional golf preferred image. Perhaps Darren Clarke did not survive because he finally learned to change. Perhaps he survived because, after everything, the game failed to change him. The warning had always been there. Talent was never the issue. Control was. And in the end, golf never completely controlled Darren Clarke. It simply watched him leave, waited for him to disappear, and then watched him win again.